Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another double take. Today's double take, I'm looking at two Denny Arcand films, both released by Canadian International Pictures, which is a sister label of Vinegar Syndrome. I blame friend of the channel Chris Mohan for this. So we're looking at 1972's Dirty Money. After all money's dirty really. And there is a suitcase of money. And Gina from 1975, which is a film that Chris talked about on his latest watch list episodes, which I'll leave a link of down below. These are two sort of crime films by Arcand, who did lots of documentaries for the 10 years before he made Dirty Money. He's probably most famous for doing Jesus of Montreal, which I saw probably 25 years ago and haven't seen since. But these two films are kind of wonderful in a fairly odd way. So we'll start with Dirty Money, or La Maudite Galette, from 1972. Again, you get a nice booklet as well. And this is about a character called Ernest, who's very quiet. We're told that he may be a little dim, or maybe just appears a little dim. He's been renting a room from this small-time businessman who owns a scrapyard, and he's rented a room in this man's house with his wife, who's a real charmer, and their two children. Granted, by the end of the film, he may be suggesting whatever happened to those two children, and it's very depressive. These two films shows as a Canada that we perhaps don't know much about. It's very barren and a wasteland. Pretty much looks like Detroit. There's a real sense of unrest, political unrest, protests, which is all kind of in the background. We have snippets on television and stuff like that of kind of socio-political unrest. And the husband is obviously having an affair. The wife drinks while she prepares the children's meal and tells the children to bugger off because their uncle is in the room, has come to the house, and they haven't seen him for about 5 years. And uncle gives them a present of $500, which they're initially grateful for, excuse me, but then the wife starts to get annoyed, suggesting, he's got more money, and, good relatives would give each other money more often, and he's only got money because his wife died and she was rich. So this seed germinates that the wife is so annoyed at this gift of $500. I mean, she forces uncle to take it back because her nose is out of joint in a very Lady Macbeth type way. She plants the seed that they should actually go to his house and break in and see if they can get his money, because they're struggling to make ends meet. And of course, little does she know that her husband's having an affair as well. So she gets the help of two deadbeat low-level thugs in one of the local pubs, and they go to try and find out where the money is from this uncle character. And that's where I'll end the plot. It's not necessarily a black comedy. I would say it's perhaps a grey comedy. You could look at it almost like a sort of riff on Bresson's L'Argent, which would actually come out 11 years later. Again, I'm not suggesting Arcand's filmmaking is like Bresson, but there is something about the way the characters act. There is a strangeness to them. It's almost a little Jarmuchian as well. And Arcand does use static camera and kind of medium shots and just lets the camera sit there. But then when he does go in for close-ups, it's much more effective. So, for example, the conversation with the uncle and the husband and wife at the table, the camera does just sit there for an awful long time as they tell jokes and get drunker. But then there's an effective close-up on the wife. The same when they go to the house. Again, it's almost a critique of suburban living. The house is it's kind of isolated by itself, so there's just lots of darkness surrounding it, and the house just kind of sits there. And again, a lot of the time, for a lot of the action, the camera just sits, again, from a certain distance from the house as we watch characters going in and out. So this has a kind of distancing effect from the audience, because the characters aren't particularly likeable or rootable for, but there's a real nihilistic engagement with the characters, I would say. There's a real bleakness and fatalism about it. Ernest is a character who perhaps we don't get to know what's going through his head at all times. We know what's going through the head of other characters. But again, very much like in Bresson's L'Argent, the fate of the forged note has a kind of ripple effect on the people that touch it and are affected by it. And again, Dirty Money has the same effect, and it does kind of go into interesting places as far as where the film ends up. So it is a very kind of offbeat film. In some ways you could view it as an alienating film, but it speaks to where kind of Canadian society was in the early to mid 70s. And it's certainly a political film in some regard, as well as a social study of kind of collapsing industry and that kind of malaise of people not making ends meet and having to make drastic measures to make ends meet. It's a very sparse film, you could argue a cold film, but it does have a, as I say, perhaps not necessarily a black sense of humour, but a kind of grey sense of humour. And it's kind of wonderful. But again, as I say, I can see why people might find it a little bit alienating. I mean, Arcand is happily still alive. So this edition has a commentary featuring Paul Carup of Cannula Exploitation and film historian Joseph Pichonsky. There's a minute interview with Arcand from 2023, which is about making the film. And there's a 23 minute piece from 2023 called Building an Industry, a new interview with former Cinématique Quebec director Robert Dodelan, and there's new interviews with cast members Gabriel Arcand, who is Arcand's brother, strangely enough, in both films, and Marcel Sabourin, which is 19 and 17 minutes respectively, and there's trailers for more of Arcand's films. Again, you really get a feel with both of these films. You can tell that Arcand was a documentary filmmaker first before he did features, because again, there's a realism and a naturalism to them, as well as a kind of oddness and strangeness and a distance from the subjects. Again, beautiful cover, even though obviously don't mind, I'm not into slip covers, but here's a lovely slip cover with embossing for Gina. As I said, this is the film that Chris Mohan talked about on his watch list. Again, another film that I'm not going to go into too much detail on. This one has a great score, and again you've got a booklet as well, and this is another film that kind of perfectly encapsulates Arcand as a filmmaker, in the sense it's kind of socio-political commentary and then it turns into something else, a bit more genre. So we open the film with a woman being beaten up by her dancer bosses, and Gina is another girl who works for them and tells them to stop and helps the girl clean up her bloody mouth. And then Gina is sent to the arse end of nowhere, the snowy wilderness, to dance and to strip in this seedy little bar with a motel, in which she stays in one of the motel rooms. But there's also a film crew and who are doing a piece on the textile industry in the local textile factory. They're claiming that they're doing, a look at the textile industry, but in actual fact they're doing more of a kind of political film about the layoffs and the unemployment in the textile industry. And again, very much like Dirty Money, you get the feeling of this is a world that's changing, people are struggling, and of course Arcand in real life had problems. He did a 2-hour documentary about the textile industry in Canada, and he had some problems getting the film made. So this is almost slightly autobiographical, and he gets his brother, again, who's in Dirty Money, to play the kind of director of the film crew. So Gina kind of strikes up a friendship with them, but there's also a gang of a mixed sex gang of people on snowmobiles who live in an abandoned ship on the frozen river, or that's where they hang out, and they are basically a bunch of scumbags. But again, you get a feeling of they probably had jobs in industry, and now that industry is shutting down. Some of them work in the textile factory, some of them don't. There's also an interesting female character who's trying to make ends meet, and has nice conversations with Gina about how much Gina makes a week for taking her clothes off, compared with how much she makes, and she's engaged to somebody but they can't actually afford to get married. So you have this whole socio-political examination of a small Canadian town that obviously survives on its textile factory, but then the textile factory are laying people off. I think it's like 150 people they're planning to lay off, and of course also that affects people living in the middle of nowhere. But throughout the film there is this feeling of these, on both sides, the camera crew who are less kind of threatening but still trying to get close to Gina, and of course the view of Gina is, oh, she's a stripper, so therefore she must be a prostitute as well. You know, the rich guy who is high up in the factory, and, you know, offering Gina money to basically go to bed with him, and she's like, well, I don't do that. So the camera crew are, well, a couple of members of the camera crew are trying to get to know her better, but then you also have this gang of reprobates and louts who get drunk and torment women, basically, including the female member of the gang. So you just have this feeling of threat and sexual threat that's built up throughout the film. Again, a small town, nothing to do apart from get drunk and cause trouble. And again, that's where I'll stop talking about the plot in this one. But again, you can definitely tell Arcand started in documentaries, because it does have that real feeling of reality, and this is a real place. But it's interesting how you know, Gina is a very kind of strong character, but there's only so much you can take, and then she calls in help from not necessarily an unlikely source, but your feelings for the people that she calls somewhat change near the end of the film, when it kind of changes into more of a genre film. But both these films are wonderful. Again, they almost exist in this strange, slightly off universe. But again, they perfectly capture a kind of world and time of uncertainty about, you know, kind of manual labour being replaced by more machines, and therefore how does that affect the workforce? How does that affect the masculinity? You know, everything has a price. Women in both these films are kind of seen as more kind of objects, apart from the wife in Dirty Money, who's more of a Lady Macbeth, but certainly later on there's a female character who is almost like a possession that gets handed from man to man. But both these are well worth checking out. Again, I blame Chris Mohan. Gina has a commentary by historian Kerla Janice and film programmer and writer Justine Smith. It's got an 11-minute video essay by Alexandra Helen Nicholas, who's always fantastic, The Exploitation of Gina from 2022. And then we've got Arcand again, directing Gina from 2022, which is 21 minutes long. And we've got new audio interviews with cast members Gabriel Arcand, Paul Barajon, Dorothy Berryman and Marcel Sabarin. And again, there's trailers for Dirty Money and one more. And of course, you get a booklet. These are spine numbers 16 and 14 in Canadian International Pictures, which sadly I might have to investigate more of. So again, I'm not a huge fan of Vinegar Syndrome's titles, but their sister label titles are certainly got me intrigued. Obviously Deaf Crocodile, which I adore in the Canadian International Pictures. So I would highly recommend both these films as a little nugget into Canadian life that perhaps we're not used to, or we don't really see on the screen too much. And it's the perfect blend of a documentary filmmaker playing about with the genre as well. So thanks very much for watching this double take of a couple of Dennis Arcand, or Denny Arcand films. Please let me know if you've seen them, what you think of them. Again, I'll leave a link to Chris Mohan's excellent watch list video down below. So this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.